Hey everybody! So today we are going to be doing a little bit of maintenance and upkeep and stuff like that before the axle goes back under the Jeep. Yesterday I put together a list of everything that needs to get done this winter. As you can see, that is a pretty hefty list. Now there are a few of those things that are going to be a lot easier to do without an axle underneath there, and three of those things are on today's list, and they all kind of go together. What that is I need a new rear main seal, and if I'm in there for the rear main seal, then I'm obviously going to put a new oil pan gasket on there, and if I'm in there that far, I might as well do an oil pump, because this is the original oil pump and I have almost 200,000 miles on this. I don't know how long it's going to last. I'm kind of surprised it's lasted already. Now this is the Melling high flow pump. So I don't exactly know the specs off the top of my head. I just know this has a higher flow rate than the factory pump, which is great in all kinds of off-camber weird situations, as well as for the fact that at some point this Jeep will get a stroker and this can get swapped over and will suffice for that. So we're going to pull the oil pan. We're going to do this. We're going to put that in. There is an option to put a second baffle in that as well, which I'm going to look into it while I'm in there. If it doesn't look too complicated, I'll probably add that. If it's going to be a huge pain, I probably won't. Otherwise, this will go in, and then everything will go back together with a new gasket. I already drained all the oil last night. No need to pull the oil filter because that's not really in my way as far as I know. So we're going to pop all the bolts on the pan, drop the pan. Should be relatively easy. The only thing that's in the way is like half of my exhaust here. And then that can all come apart and go back together. That should be relatively quick. But before we do that, I just got a call from my local steel shop, and my tubes are in for my control arms. So we're gonna go pick those up so I can get those together sometime this afternoon as well, and then that can go in. So off we go. Okay, so we are back, and I am in the process of removing the oil pan. So there's quite a few bolts that go right around the edge here and about the back and around the back, around the front. They all appear to be 7/16 so far, except for this one random one here that is a 1/2 inch. I'm not sure if that's intentional or if somebody replaced that at some point in time. I doubt this has ever been done, so it's possible that that was there intentionally. There are some that are like this, where there's studs sticking out, not just a bolt head. So I've gone through and put a mark on the oil pan where they are. There's one, that's the fourth one in on the front, on the passenger side, and then if you go over here to the driver's side, kind of hard to see up in there, but the first 2, 3 of them are. I would assume this fourth one is as well, since it holds this. And then back here there's 1, 2, 3, I'm assuming 4 more. And then I think that was it. So I'm just kind of marking everything where those are, and then I'm going to pull all the bolts and slowly lower this down, making sure to not lose any of my bolts. And once that's out, then we can kind of get a look at how we're going to do the rear main and what we would need to do to add that other baffle in. So I've got all of the bolts off except for one that's kind of just holding everything in place right now. As noted before, this one was a 1/2 inch, and the second one in on this side was also a 1/2 inch. And then there's 2 that are tucked way up in the back, up in here, and those were also 1/2 inch. So I'm assuming, since of the locations, those were there from factory. So I'm going to pull this one bolt off here and see if I can get this out. I don't know if I'm going to be able to with the exhaust here. Sometimes I hear about people having to pull the exhaust to do that, but I think without the axle or any suspension or anything in here, I might be able to get to it. So let's see if I can prop you up in a way that shows what's going on. All right. one. Okay, so what I'm running into is, I don't know if you're going to be able to see it, but no, you're probably not going to be able to. On this last bolt way up in there, that one there, there's a little tab from this inspection cover that's kind of holding that in place. So I might be able to shove a screwdriver up in there and just kind of wedge it a little bit so that I can pop this down. It's just a tiny little tab. I'm not even sure if it's supposed to be there, if it's just a bent piece. So I'm going to grab a long screwdriver and see if I can pop this off. So it turns out, I threw the light up in here, and you can kind of see, maybe, yep, you can see the one little tab right there, and then there's also another one, which you can't see now, but there's another one right there in the center. So I guess I am going to have to pull this inspection cover, so I'm going to pull those quick, and then this should drop right out. Alright, well, we are home free. Pan is out. What I did end up doing was just cutting the two bolts that hold the downpipe to the manifold. I was going to pull that inspection cover, but in order to pull the inspection cover you have to pull the starter. I didn't want to pull the starter, so I just took a long screwdriver and I was able to bend those two little tabs up out of the way enough that I could slide the oil pan past it, especially with the exhaust out of the way. I think you'd probably have to take the exhaust off regardless. I don't really know how you manage to do this without that, so I just pulled that off. I had all the room in the world to get to it here, but I can understand how that would be relatively frustrating if you don't have all of the stuff here gone. So that is off. Here is my old seal, which somehow amazingly was still working for the most part. Rear main is tucked back up in there, and here's the oil pump that's going to get replaced. Now I know the new oil pump is a little bit larger, and I think there is a tiny bit of massaging to the oil pan that needs to get done. So before I start anything, really, I'm just going to kind of clean all of this up, clean the pan up. One thing I do highly recommend is that if you're going to do this project, clean under here first. I've got so much dirt on my face from working upside down here, especially trying to deal with all of this back here. That was just packed full of stuff. So I'm going to wipe all this down so I have a clean surface to work with. I'm going to wipe out, get the remaining oil out of the oil pan, which is kind of a surprising amount actually. Clean the oil pan itself down and just kind of have a clean start when I do this. And then first thing we're going to do is the rear main seal, then we'll do the oil pump, and then we'll talk about setting the new oil pan seal itself. Comes with some fancy little clips here to make that really easy. So we're going to get everything clean and then we'll get rolling on that rear main. Well, I let everything under here drip for a little while I clean my oil pan, so that's all good now. So the next step is to go after the rear main seal, which is underneath the final bearing cap here. And in order to do that, we need to remove this piece down here, which I believe is an oil girdle, and it ties all the caps together and I think helps with oil flow as well. So we need to remove that so we can get to the bolts that hold the cap on. That is a 9/16 that you'll need for these. There's 7 bolts on each side. So we're going to pull that off and then we will be able to get to that cap. Well, with that other piece off, now you can see the last cap here. So we need to pull these two bolts off, and these are 13/16 is what I used to get them off. They were tight, but not overly tight, and it looks like this is actually a full bolt, not just a nut on there. So that one's off. This one needs a little bit more persuasion yet. Maybe, yep. And then as I'm pulling this off, I don't want to drop this cap on the ground, so I'm gonna pull this most of the way off here, and then probably either stick a screwdriver up in here and kind of wiggle it back and forth a little bit. I have one right here. Yes, I do. Not a big enough screwdriver apparently. But I am gonna find a way to kind of knock this free first so it'll drop onto this bolt, and then I can pull that bolt all the way out. I don't want to drop that accidentally on the ground and get it any dirtier than it already needs to be, just by handling it. So I will pop that free, and then we'll look at that on the bench. Alright, here we go. This is what your rear main cap looks like. So you can see on the back part of it here, this is the seal, and here is my new seal. You can tell it's got the little tabs off the sides here, so that'll be my lower piece, and then this piece will be the upper piece. So I don't know if I can pull this out with one hand. I don't think so, but maybe. I'm going to pull this out, and then we'll take a look at it. You can see that this tab, or this seal, has kind of a little tab off of one side. We want to make sure that the new one goes in exactly the way the old one came out. So I used a needle nose pliers here and just pulled these tabs off at the end to get them out of the way. Then I was able to slowly wedge a flat blade screwdriver in between the seal and the chase for it there. So now with that free, I should be able to just grab it with the needle nose pliers and pop it right out. And there we go, there's the old seal. Now, before I put the new one in, I'm going to clean it out and get all this extra dirt and everything off of here, filled up. But the nice thing about this is because I do have the little tabs off of the sides, it can really only sit in there one way, which is awesome. So I'm going to get this super clean, and then I'm going to actually take a little bit of the old oil that I drained out of the engine and just kind of coat this seal completely all the way around. It'll help it sit in here a little bit better, and then especially I want to coat the top here so that when it sits on the crank, it's not dry right away, and it'll help to keep this in place, help to keep it from spinning if this has a little coat of oil on it, same way you coat the seal on your oil filter before you put it on all the way. It just kind of helps everything get into place without tearing or pulling or anything like that. Well, coating this in oil helped a ton. I basically just dunked this in my oil bucket over there, and it slid right into place, which is awesome. Just wanted to make sure that everything is pushed in nice and tight, and that's pretty much all you got to do for this piece. So that's the easy one. That's done. Now we get to the fun one, which is under there. What you're going to want is something to kind of tap that out, and what I have here is what used to be a screwdriver and has now begun its second life as a pointy thing used for hitting things. So I'm going to grab this and a hammer and take a ride underneath here, and you can see right here is one end of the rear main seal there, and the other end is over on the other side over here. Now I can get to this one pretty good, so what I'm gonna do is just take my poker here and just kind of tap on that lightly and hopefully work it out far enough that I can grab one end of it with a needle nose and pull that out. From what I've seen, it's not super difficult, but it doesn't move super fast. So you just want to be careful. You don't want to mar any of those other surfaces in there. So just take your time with this step and slowly work it out. And once you can grab it, grab it. But just take your time, not designed to be a fast process. Well, good news and bad news. Good news is that it's coming out. Bad news is that it was a lot more difficult to get out than I had anticipated. Now, this hasn't run in a good month, maybe a little bit longer, maybe 6 weeks. I don't know when I parked it. So I'm assuming lack of lubrication was part of the deal. That, and it's probably a 200,000 mile seal. So the one in the bearing cap didn't want to come super easy either, but I had a lot more leverage and ability to work on it and get around it there. So what I ended up doing was spending a little bit of time on the forums and got some ideas and came back to it. So what I did is I loosened all of these cap bolts, which I really didn't want to do, but it helped. And so I loosened all of them just a little bit, wiggled each one of these caps loose, and then was able to just kind of give a little bit of a pull on the crank there and dropped it just a tiny bit, which took a little bit of pressure off of that. And even with that, it did not want to come out. I took my screwdriver, the pounding screwdriver, and took the tip off of it and just basically made it a square. So even with that, it did not want to come out, and it was very, very stuck. So after reading a little bit more, somebody had suggested heating it up. So I grabbed the old heat gun here, got her nice and warm, and just let it sit on there for, I don't know, maybe 30 seconds each side, if that. And once I thought that was warm enough, I took that screwdriver that I made into a square again and tapped it twice, and it broke free. And then as soon as it broke free, it moved really, really easily. And I mean, right there, it just came right out. So it's really just getting it broke free. Once it's free, it comes out really nice. It's just getting it free. So unfortunately, I'll have to go through and retorque each and every one of these. It's a 3-step torque process for those, which sucks because it's going to take a while, but at least I got this out. I didn't damage anything. So we're going to do like we did with the other piece, and we're going to soak it in oil and then feed it back through there. And I think the Felpro kit actually comes with a fancy little piece. Yes, it does. This little piece of paper in here is not for nothing. It is actually designed to help you get this in there without damaging the seal. So this gets folded in half and then it acts as kind of like a little guide for this. So I'll get that mocked up, and then when we're in place, I'll show you how that works. Alright, well, it's hard to see on this camera because it doesn't like to zoom in or focus close here, but there's kind of a little secondary lip on what would be the front side. This is to the transmission, and this is to the front of the engine. And then there's kind of like a little bit of a ridged thing there. And this one is exactly the same way. So what I'm going to do is just basically put this in so everything lines up. So that secondary lip and the little ridged part is to the front of the engine, just like this one is, and it'll match up, and there's your full seal. So I'm going to dunk this, and then just just push it up through there as easily as I can, and then to get everything in place, I'll use that same screwdriver with the flat head and or the squared off head, I guess, and tap it flat. And then right on, this was the bag that rear main came in. It says apply RTV sealer to the outside edges of the cap recesses in the block. And I'm not 100% sure what that means, but I'm gonna assume that that's this edge right here, and that would be on the block side, because that is recessed into the block on the other side. But I'm gonna assume that that's this seal right there, which would make sense, because that's kind of the joint piece where things would potentially be leaking through. Everything else is kind of internal to the engine. So I'm gonna go ahead and apply a little bit of RTV here and here when I put this all together. Otherwise, we're just gonna dunk this and slide it in. Okay, so we're ready to throw this back in. I'm just gonna basically take it upside down like this and put it on the bottom right there, and then slide it up and around. Now this little piece that came in this kit, I folded it in half, and I'm gonna tuck it over the top like this, with the paper sticking out past the seal there, and that's going to help me get this whole thing started so that I don't end up tearing the seal trying to push it into that channel. So I've got my seal aligned the right way with this extra lip towards the front of the engine, head, and tuck this piece in there. Okay, that's started. And then see if I can slide this right underneath it. Alright, I was actually able to slide that in there without using the little piece. It was kind of hard to handle both pieces, but with this soaked in oil, once I got it started, it's been sliding super nice now. Oh, now we're getting a little stiff, but still going nice. Okay, now it's getting snug, so I'm just going to be careful and keep a little bit of inward pressure on that, and I may have to get my screwdriver out now and just kind of tap that the rest of the way. So I think that's what I'm going to do, and just slowly tap it up until it starts to peek through on the other side and we can get that flush. Alright, so I got that back in, a little bit of RTV on the back lip like I showed, and then I went through and retorqued all of these. Now since I had loosened them, I had to do the three-step process on all of them. What they want you to do is go to 40 foot-pounds, and then 70 foot-pounds, and then 80 foot-pounds. So I started there, since that was the loosest, and this was the one I had loosened the least. I brought that up to 40, and then I actually started over here and worked my way this way, since this was the closest and that was the farthest. Then I slowly brought that back up. So 40 back and forth all the way across, 70 back and forth all the way across, and then 80 back and forth all the way across, and then back the other way with 80 again, just to make sure everything was good. And so that's all set to go. Now the next thing we're going to be doing while we're in here is swapping out the oil pump here. And as I mentioned in the beginning, I'm swapping that out for the Melling high flow pump. So we're going to pop this one off, which I believe is just this bolt and this bolt, which are 1/2 inch. So we're going to take those off and pull this out. Yep, it was just those two bolts, and then it did hold itself there, so I just had to wiggle it a little bit, I'm assuming, to pull this pin out and to slide over that sleeve there. It does still have some oil in it, so I'm going to go dump this out quick, and then we'll line up the new one and see how it's going to fit. So if you compare the old pump to the new pump here, they do appear to be pretty much identical. The new one appears to be a little bit more robust, which makes sense since it's a high flow pump. Same pathways, same everything. This has a seal that came with it, or a gasket I suppose you'd call it, which does block off this one hole here, which this gasket is still on here. It's become part of it over time, and that does not block off that hole. However, if you look at the mating surface here, you can see a ring where that was deadheading anyway, so I don't really see any reason that would be an issue to block it off at the seal rather than at the engine block there. So I'm going to go ahead, throw the seal on here, wiggle the pickup into place there, and then go ahead and bolt that back up, and then we'll see if we need to do any clearancing of the oil pan itself to clear this new pump. Alright, what seems to be the biggest issue with installing this pump is actually putting the pickup on the pump. So this goes in like so, and that is an extremely snug fit. Now they do make a specific tool for that. It's quite expensive and it's kind of unnecessary if you are willing to do a little bit of a workaround. So shout out to Rusty Jeep. Watched his video installing this. Awesome video. He actually threw his in the freezer, which in theory would shrink this metal just a little bit, make it a little bit easier to go in. I'm going to try to do it without doing that. If it doesn't work, then I'll throw it in the freezer for a little bit. He also put a little bit of Permatex on this shaft here in order to make a better seal in there, and that just helps with keeping air out of there, which you don't want air in there, you want oil, so makes sense. My little flange here that holds this pickup tube in place was too close. I could not get it through there, so I opened it up just a little bit. You can see that it's a little ways off there, so I am going to tap this in slowly and then just kind of keep waiting and watching this specifically to make sure that everything is lined up appropriately. I think with that little bit of extra RTV in there, it'll help seal it even if I don't get it fully seated. So the way I'm going to go about doing this is get this started right there, and then I'm going to wrap something around here so I don't mar this tube. Simply put a channel locks around it loosely, just above that lip right there, and then use a hammer and just kind of work my way around it, slowly tapping it down in there as I go until it bottoms out or until this bolt hole lines up. So we're going to go ahead and get that in there, and then once it's in, we'll be installing it back on the Jeep, and then we can go about clearancing the oil pan, which I believe is this area right here, what I will need to clearance for the pump itself, and then potentially down there a little bit for the pickup, but from what I've been seeing, quite possibly not. But for here, I'm pretty sure I will, especially having this baffle in here. Okay, well, I did end up throwing the pickup in the freezer for a little bit, which helped quite a bit. Then I put the RTV around it and just slowly worked it until it was in there, until this lined up, and then I did put RTV around the outside as well, so that should be sealed well enough, especially with how snug that is. Now the next step is to make sure the oil pan fits, which after a quick test fit, I can tell you it does not. It does appear to be the baffle that's hitting, so what I did is I took some white lithium grease and I just kind of coated this lower part and this outer part here, and then I just put the oil pan up until it hit. And what that did for me was that allowed me to see where it's touching. So you can see there's a little bit of grease right there, tiny bit there and there as well, which I'm assuming that's just from getting it into place. But it seems like this right here is my main trouble area. So I am going to take a hammer and find a block or something and just kind of massage this down a little bit, and then repeat this process again until I've made enough clearance room here that this will seat all the way up against the block. And once that's done, then we'll do the same thing for the actual pickup itself. Well, that is what it looks like when it's clearance. Now, if I remember, if you order, a lot of the new pans don't come with a baffle in there, which if you don't have a baffle, this is not as big of a deal. It just barely touches the pan. Those of us with a baffle, sometimes people cut them out, or you just massage it like this until it clears. I did the same process up and down until it wasn't leaving any residue on there. So I moved to the pickup itself, and you can kind of see one little spot right here and one little spot right there. Now, the way this is done, again, shout out to Rusty Jeep on YouTube here. You put a 3/8 drill bit on the screen side and lay that across there, and I coated that with grease so I could see as well, and that's where I'm hitting. Now, I don't think that this is really that much of an issue right here, just because that's a pretty big gap and the drill bit does stick off both sides, and I'm thinking I'm catching this rib on one of the far ends of the drill bit. But you can see right here, my oil pan has been massaged from the outside before. So for sake of giving myself a little bit of room of error here, I'm going to go ahead and just make a little bit of extra room there for that. Not really a big deal. And then go ahead and clean this thing out really good. I'm pretty sure I've got a little bit of metal shavings and stuff from hitting that. So I'm going to clean this out super well, and then I guess we'll go about getting it back in. Well, we are ready to put the pan back in. Almost. I almost forgot to put this oil girdle back on, so I'm going to throw that on real quick. But other than that, we are ready to put the oil pan back on. I did spray the outside, just gloss black, so it has an extra layer of protection against corrosion, and I can see when I hit it and how dirty it ends up getting if anything's leaking. So that was kind of the idea behind that. But we are good to go in here. These little pins that come with the Velcro kit for this gasket are really nice, actually. It kind of does half the work for you, which is cool. So they screw into those 4 corner bolts, the ones that were the half instead of the 7/16. It's those holes. So, and then the gasket just slides up and over the top of this. You can tighten it with a screwdriver if you can't get them tightened up by hand. And they don't hold it tight, but they do help. It actually has quite a bit of play in there, but it does help. This channel around this front piece here looks like it's going to seat really nicely. I'm not worried about that one at all. The back one back here, I am a little bit more worried on. There seems to be a lot of extra gasket. I'm assuming that'll get squished in as the pan goes up, but I'm worried that it's not going to seat appropriately. So I'm just going to have to kind of get it as close to started as I can, and then be very careful putting that pan up just to make sure that that seats appropriately. But other than that, we are kind of ready to go in here. So I'm going to throw that girdle back on before I forget again. They do recommend that you apply a little bit of RTV where the rear main meets the block and where the water pump housing, actually the timing chain cover, meets the block. And that's right here, here, and then here and here. And generally, like when I pulled this one off, I could see where there was RTV there in the past, so that made that really simple. But if you look under here, you can kind of see where this piece meets this piece, and right there is where they want that RTV just as a secondary seal, because if it's going to leak anywhere, it's going to be there. So, and then same thing up in this corner over here. So I added a little bit of RTV there. I also added a little bit of RTV underneath this in that channel just to kind of help hold it in place. I wanted to sag a little bit. It seems like there's a lot of extra material there, but I'm hoping it'll all squish into place. So there's a little bit of RTV in there just to help hold it in place while I get the pan up there. Then hopefully it rides in its channel there. So at this point, pretty much ready to put the pan back on. I might take a little bit of RTV and schmutz it there and there, just for good measure on top of this seal. So other than that, we're going to throw the pan up. One thing to mention with putting a new oil pump in is you do want to make sure that you prime the oil pump. Now it can help pre-filling that pump with oil, but it can get messy and a pain if you have to on and off with the pan and everything. So there are a couple different ways you can go about doing that. You can actually pull the distributor off and turn the pump manually in there. They make tools for it. You can make a tool. A simple search can answer different ways to go about that. There's also the method of just pulling the main coil wire off of the distributor and cranking until you see oil pressure. I would assume disconnecting the fuel pump and cranking until you see oil pressure would be a similar result. I will probably do one of those two. I don't really see any reason to go the extra step on this. I've seen plenty of people shut one step of the process off essentially and have good enough results. So I'm gonna do that when the time comes. I'm not gonna be putting oil back in this for a little while. It'll be 4 months before it even leaves the garage, so I'll get around to that at some point. I just wanted to make sure that nobody skips the priming step, as it is kind of important for the whole process, depending on who you talk to, I guess. So anyway, that is that. So oil pan is back in place. I did spritz it a little bit again with the black paint just to cover my fingerprints. It seems as though the seal sat really nicely. I was concerned about that back spot, so I took a little bit of RTV and put it on the inside of the loop, and it helped keep it in place while I set the pan. So hopefully that holds well. First note: you can remove the inspection cover without removing the starter, otherwise that would kind of defeat the point of an inspection cover, and I should have known that because I've had this off before. It was just so caked in stuff that it looked like one piece. So when I started cleaning it, I realized, oh, it's two pieces. And I pulled it so I can check my torque or my flex plate there. And I was also hoping I'd be able to see that seal a little bit from the backside, but no such luck. So that's that note. Other note is there is a tiny little strap that goes across the back here. It's shiny up in there, you can see. I'm not entirely sure why that's in there, but it was in there, so I put it back in there. I hardly noticed it when it came out because there was so much dirt in there and it kind of just fell on the floor. So make sure to watch for that. I don't think there was anything else on that note. I had mentioned that I was thinking about doing an extra baffle in there. Now that baffle would have gone on the opposite end of the deep part of the pan from the factory baffle that's in there. If you look right here, here's the factory baffle, and then they added that secondary baffle in there. So that was one thing that I was thinking about doing, and I decided against that just because it's worked the way it has for so long, and chances are this engine and oil pan are only going to be in here at max 2 more years, so I didn't want to put a bunch of time into it. If I determine that's a necessary thing in the future, I can just buy an oil pan like that, or I'll buy a new oil pan and start fresh and go that route. Other than that, I think it's all pretty straightforward stuff. It's just really nitpicky and time consuming. It was a lot easier to have stuff out of the way. I would think you'd probably want to remove your exhaust regardless, just because it's going to make it a lot easier to get that pan in and out of there. And if you have to test fit it several times, especially if you're doing that pump, that's going to suck. So other than that, I don't think there's too much. So I will add links to the gasket, the rear main seal, and the melling pump in the description. I'm also going to link the site that talks about that additional baffle in the oil pan. I will link that because that site actually walks through installing the melling pump as well. So that's a lot of good information there. Other than that, I think that's it. So appreciate you guys watching. Hopefully this helped everybody out a little bit, especially with that pump. The rest of it's kind of straightforward. But comment if you got any questions, if you see anything that I missed or something that somebody else may overlook that I didn't mention. Just throw that in the comments. Otherwise, like, subscribe, and catch you on the next one.